Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Astro Imaging channel. My name is Tim Hutchison, and I'll be the host for this evening. If you're new to our channel, welcome. And if you're not new to the channel, welcome back. Please remember to like and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell icon down at the bottom so that you never miss any of our terrific content. Speaking of our terrific content, we have a great show for you tonight, but we'll get back to that in a second. Next week, Sid Freed will be here for the continuation of his presentation that he started a few weeks ago. Iju Zhang will be returning the week after that, and Rod Pomio will be here the week after Ijo, and lots more great stuff in the weeks to come. But of course, as we always say, we need you. You guys are the ones that make the channel what it is. If you're interested in giving a presentation, please go out to the astroimagingchannel.org and click on the contact page and fill out the form, and someone from our team will get in touch with you and get you scheduled. It's really that simple. So without further ado, we'll continue on with tonight's program. And as I said, John Hayes is joining us tonight. John is a retired engineer, an entrepreneur, and a research professor with degrees in physics, astronomy, and optics from the University of Arizona. In his working life, John developed systems for testing optics, disk drive components, and many of the world's largest telescope mirrors. In retirement, John has returned to the hobby of astroimaging. He currently operates a small wide-field refractor and a 20-inch telescope remotely. And tonight, he's going to be telling us about remote imaging and give us a tour of what it takes to operate your own telescope at OpsTech down in Chile, which is a large remote observatory down there. So with that, John, are you ready? I'll turn it over to you.
I am ready, Tim, and thank you. We'll get the screen sharing going here. And can you guys see that there?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Well, when Tim first asked me to do this, I was actually in Chile at OpsTech, and I get so many questions about imaging in Chile and remote imaging in general, kind of behind the scenes, that I thought it might be a good idea to maybe do a little presentation on this. And it was just, Tim asked at exactly the right time, and I thought this is the perfect way to do this here on the Astro Imaging channel. So this will be a little bit of a tour of what's involved with imaging in Chile. A lot of gory details. This won't be a technical presentation like I normally give, but we'll give you a little tour and give you an idea of what does it take to do remote imaging. And for those of you who might not know me, I started building telescopes in 8th grade. I've got degrees in physics, astronomy, and optics. And as Tim said in the introduction, I'm a retired optical engineer and design lots of optical metrology equipment, mainly for the disk drive industry and for large telescopes and aerospace. I'm currently an adjunct research professor at the White College of Optical Sciences at the University of Arizona. I've served on a couple of JWST advisory committees for testing the optics. I used to operate a C14 here in Bend and then moved to an Edge 14 that I ran remotely for about 5 years in New Mexico. And as Tim said in the introduction, I've got a 20-inch and a refractor in Chile. Well, the question, of course, is why do remote imaging? A lot of you might know this, but right off the bat, you get more clear nights for where most of us live, darker skies, better seeing, get a dedicated imaging site with a low horizon. And for me, one of the big things was there's no need to stay up all night. You can start your equipment. It's all just sitting there. You start it up, you get it running, and then you go on to get some sleep. And then finally, you can get lower cost per image, and we'll talk a little bit about how that works here. So one of the big things that people talk to me about or ask about is, what does this cost? And you'll get a really good idea out of this by the time we get through this presentation. But most people start out, in their backyard on a driveway, and the front end cost is buying your equipment. You roll it out on the driveway, and you take images. Of course, the benefit isn't really high. You got to stay up late at night. The weather might not be perfect. You might be under a light polluted sky in a city. People graduate from that a lot of times to a backyard observatory, and I would love that. That would be fantastic. Have it right in your backyard. But again, you don't get a lot more benefit out of that, changing location. But it's a lot more convenient, and you can gather a lot more data, costs more. And the next step after that is usually to go to a domestic remote site. And there are lots of them, SRO, Sierra Remote Observatory, New Mexico Skies, Deep Sky West, and there's a long list of these things, these places. Of course, you have to rent a pier, so there's some ongoing costs, but the benefit goes way up. You get much darker skies. You get a lot of the benefits of remote imaging. And once you've done that, the next step is to go international remote, where you can get even better skies. You may get access, you'll see, to different skies. In my case with Chile, the southern hemisphere. And there are a lot of these in Chile, Namibia, Canary Islands, etc., Spain. And then there's one of these options that's kind of off of the line, that's buying your own land and doing your own remote. And I considered that for a while. We had some cheap land here in Central Oregon where I could buy something. And some folks have made a good success out of doing this, but it's hard to do this within a day's round trip drive, and you're paying taxes, carrying costs, service is tough. And I think this for me felt like a millstone around my neck. That just didn't seem like a good idea for me in the long term. And you can look at this in a different way. And again, this is kind of a hand-waving argument, but your cost per image is the highest in your backyard. You put all this money into your equipment, and at least for a lot of us, you don't get a lot of images out of your driveway. And when I say that, I mean like a whole night, every night. You're not getting that kind of, typical for most of us. We're not getting that many images. Going to a backyard observatory, it's easier. You don't have to roll your equipment out or set it up. You can get more images done. Buying your own land, of course, you can get better image quality if you can get out of a city location. But going domestic remote, you get a lot more images per night that are good. And in my experience, most of the domestic sites are very good, but as we'll see, I don't think they can touch some of the international remotes, in particular Chile, in terms of the number of clear nights each year. So that's why I say the cost goes down still maybe a little bit. It's a tough argument to tell you exactly how much this is. I mean, this is just sort of a hand-waving argument. And so why Chile? I mean, why go to Chile? Well, of course, there's even darker skies. I have to say, down in Chile, it's the darkest skies I've ever seen in my life. And I thought I'd seen really dark skies in New Mexico, but Chile really is amazingly dark. More clear nights. They advertise over 300 per year, and I think that's really real. We're in the winter down there right now, and this is the worst season. So a few of you who may already be down there may be rolling your eyes right now because we've had a lot of cloudy nights. But in general, the seeing is excellent. And of course, you get access to the southern sky. So this is a whole new sky to explore. And one of my trips, I ran into Matt Dieterich down there, and he was taking these great skyscapes. So this is one of his images. And then why go to OpsTech? Well, OpsTech, of course, is in Chile, excellent sky conditions. But the main thing, they have superb infrastructure, and we'll show you a lot of that tonight. Really state-of-the-art facilities. They've got a really good data link with 100 megabit symmetric fiber link. They've got 50 megabit per second radio link and a 4G backup system for data. They've got great support down there. It's very professionally managed. They've got, in general, very good communications, and I think they've got fair pricing for what you get out of that. It is getting more expensive as a function of time, but I think it's still a very fair price down there. And I always want to know, who am I dealing with? Well, it turns out these are the two guys who own OpsTech, Professor Andreas Jordan and Dr. Vincent Sook. Both have PhDs. Vincent is a PhD in optical engineering, so I really like Vincent because he's into optics. But his dissertation was on setting up and running remote imaging systems. That's what he specializes in. And Andreas is a professional astronomer. He's the real deal. He's published over 210 articles, 12,500 citations. Both these guys are very smart, and I think they did something very hard with setting up this observatory, and my hat's off to them. They really did an amazing job. When we talk about a remote imaging system, there are 5 basic components that you need to do remote imaging. The first is a means to remotely turn your power on and off to your system, a means to run a remote PC. And I think almost everybody here who's doing imaging knows how to do that. But you need a way of running your PC remotely. You need line power, and you need a high bandwidth network connection. And if you think about doing your own observatory in the middle of nowhere, these are two things that can really become a challenge. Starlink is making that maybe a little bit easier, but the high network bandwidth connection in the middle of nowhere in the past was a pretty significant barrier to entry. You need a means to retrieve the data, and we'll talk about what that means in a little while here. And you need a means to protect the equipment during the day and when the weather's bad, namely an observatory, a building. And a remote system can be either user-operated or robotic. A user-operated system works just like it would in your backyard. You start the system each night, you run imaging sequences, and you shut it down every morning. And frankly, this is the way I run my remote systems. It's user-operated. I start it up each night and turn it off each morning. And it's pretty simple to run that way. You can step it up and go to full robotic imaging, and that's a system that doesn't really require an operator. So it operates from a user-supplied list of targets and parameters for when to shoot those targets. It starts and stops automatically, and it automatically determines the optimum sky position from a list of targets. And so basically, you just get up in the morning to a bunch of data, and your system runs according to the targets that you want to acquire data on. When we get down to Chile, a common question is, what's the line power? That's a simple question to answer. I mean, it's 220 volts, 50 hertz. And my recommendation to people is design your system to run on the local power line, no matter where you go. You can use a transformer to run at 110 volts, 50 hertz, but I don't recommend that. I actually did that on the 20-inch, and it runs fine. But the problem you run into is that most US UPS systems, uninterruptible power supplies, don't work at 50 hertz. And that was a surprise to me. I didn't think 50 hertz would be any problem, but that turns out to be a kind of a showstopper if you ship a UPS system from the US down there to hook up to your system. The line power at OpsTech is generally very reliable. As you'll see, it's a great big UPS system. It's battery powered. And so it's generally very reliable. And I didn't know that before I went down there. I mean, I was expecting brownouts and power problems and little issues here and there, and that virtually never happens. How do you control power? The next thing on our list, well, there's a couple of ways. The one on the bottom, the digital loggers IP power switch has been around for a while, and that's just a way to manage line power. It's pretty simple to use. If you go to Chile or you go to an international location, most are 220, and Digital Loggers really only sells one unit that works on 220, and this is the picture of that unit. If you just go buy the one that you use in the US, they're only set up for 110 volts. So you need to be careful about that. The blue box on the top is Pegasus' new PowerBox version 3. And I think this is a fantastic little box. You can do DC power switching. You can do USB, connect, disconnect. You can do power monitoring. This box will do all kinds of things. And this was not available when I sent my equipment down there. I think if it had been, I would have used it. But it's a great way to switch power. You're switching DC instead of AC. The Digital Loggers is switching AC. This switches DC. But it's a fantastic, I think, advance in terms of controlling your system remotely. The user interface on these things is pretty straightforward. I think a lot of you who have used the Digital Loggers have, certainly have seen this. It's very simple. You just define each socket, give it a name, and then you can sign in over the internet and turn things on and off. With the Pegasus PowerBox V3, again, it's a very simple user interface. Once you set it up, you can just sign into it and connect and disconnect USB ports and turn power ports on and off. So it's really simple to do. The remote desktop solutions, of course, years ago, the remote desktop solution was TeamViewer, the free version. And I think it's fallen out of favor among a lot of users. It certainly has with me. They chased a lot of people around for being commercial users and kicked people off. And it still works. The free version does work. And I use it mainly for a backup. I've gone to Chrome Remote Desktop. I think Chrome Remote Desktop is just fantastic. It's fast, it's free, and it's a very good system, I think. the guys at OpsTech actually tried to talk me out of it. And once they saw it, they went, oh my gosh, this is better than what we were trying to talk you into. And of course, there's other ones, Microsoft Remote Desktop, AnyDesk, Go to My PC. I think even Parallels has just come out with a remote desktop system. And there's lots of other ones. I mean, there's probably 20 or 30 other ones that we could talk about, but these are probably the most commonly used ones. Data transfer and management. This is an interesting thing for when you go remote. A lot of people start off by gathering data on their local drive at the observatory and then using Google Drive or Dropbox to transfer data. And it's really work intensive. You gather a lot of data each night, and then you've got to upload it and then download it to your local machine. They used to have a really nice backup functionality to these so that you could automatically upload data as the data came in. But all of the cloud storage systems that I'm aware of anyway have gone to a sync function, which is very different. Basically what it means is that when you download your data and you erase anything on your local drive, it'll also erase it on where you downloaded it. It keeps everything the same. So you can potentially lose data with the sync function. So you have to be very careful with that. And if you're gathering enough data over time, the cloud storage keeps getting more and more expensive depending on how much you have stored. And if you intend to do this for a while, it gets pretty expensive over time. The second way to do this is with a NAS drive system. NAS stands for Network Accessory System. It's kind of a generic name, but what it is one of these little boxes. This is actually the one that I use from Synology. And this little box is really a PC that has a specialty purpose of just managing data. It's a RAID-enabled system. The one that I use has 4 slots. I happen to put 12 terabyte SSDs in this thing, and actually they're spinning drives. They're not SSDs, and these are special NAS-enabled drives. And you get with depending on what RAID system you set up, you get about 35 or so terabytes of data, which for my system, for my 20-inch, will last about 10 years worth of data. And so the cost is up front. These things are, you've got to buy the drives, the memory. The box itself is like $500. And then I think with the drives, I might have paid, I don't know, $1,200. I can't remember the exact amount, but there, you can look into how much these cost. The beauty of this is it's really easy to set these up so that data just appears on your NAS system every morning. And this is how I manage it. And there are other ways to do this, but I have an industrial rated PC sitting in Chile. It has 2 SSDs in it. One is for the operating system and program files, and the other one I look at as just a data buffer. That's all it does. It has log files, it has some backup files, but the system is set up to automatically upload each image right after it's taken to the NAS server that sits in my house. And I have that set up to do a daily backup with an offsite NAS server. And I want you to remember the data is what you really pay for. So the goal here is not to lose data. And this is a really, really bulletproof way to make sure you're not losing data. I then take data off of my local RAID NAS server and just put it on a USB drive for processing. I'm not so careful about backing that up, but I probably should be. But that's how I process, is just on a local USB drive. But this is a really nice way to do this for remote data, particularly when you're gathering lots of data every night. And with my 2 telescopes, by the way, it's a significant amount of data. It's probably 12 gigabytes every night, maybe a little more. How about your telescope, the imaging system? Well, the 3 most important things are reliability, reliability, and reliability. When you put a system 7,000 miles away in another hemisphere, when it fails, it's a nightmare. It can be a nightmare. So having reliable components is really important. The next important things are high quality components. They tend to be more reliable. Optimize the performance of your optics in terms of optical alignment, polar alignment. Be sure to have robust mechanics. If cameras are wiggling around, whatever, that's bad news. And the reason I have all this stuff on here is I've seen everything in these remote observatories. You would be surprised the stuff that people send in to operate remotely. And then serviceability, making it so that the techs can service it. So, you know, the main message that I have for anybody who wants to do this is it's a long ways away. Make sure that it's right before you send it down there. You know, what works in your backyard might not be good enough. And this little mess of a telescope here was actually at a remote observatory. That was actually a system running at a remote observatory. It's on a tripod. Unbelievable. I don't know how long it actually ran before it fell apart. But cables should be routed and labeled. You need industrial ruggedized PCs. You know, avoid laptops. I see laptops all the time, and I can't believe it that people send laptops out to remote observatories. Some of them get away with it, but it's not a good practice. And then you need some online troubleshooting capability, and that's a big part of designing your system for what you can turn off, what you can connect, what you can disconnect, voltages that you can read. And that's why I like that Pegasus system so much, is that you can actually online, you can go in and try and troubleshoot things. You need redundancy, you need backups, and you need spares at the remote observatory. You know, I look at this sending a telescope down to the southern hemisphere as sort of a very light version of launching Hubble or JWST. You're going to send it out there. It's best if you can figure out how to service it and make sure that you can keep it running while it's out there. Now, in our case, of course, we can actually go to Chile to fix it. And we can mail things there. So it's not quite as bad as Hubble or JWST, but you'll find out pretty quickly when something breaks, it can be a real nightmare and a real headache. So the big question is, what's it cost? Well, there's the two big factors are getting your equipment there, shipping and insurance, value-added taxes, duty, fees, transportation to the mountain. And of course, there's rent. And at OpsTech, you pay annually. You don't pay monthly. They come to you annually. And then there's other associated costs like on-site servicing. There's a certain hourly rate past a certain level. And then sending and retrieving replacement parts, and then travel if you want to go down there and service your equipment. In Chile, the duty and VAT tax, it's 6% duty on new equipment. Excuse me. It's 0% duty on used equipment. And then everything gets hit with a 19% VAT, value-added tax on declared value plus shipping and insurance. So it costs over 25% just to get your new equipment through customs in Chile. So if you send new equipment down there, you call up PlaneWave or you call up somebody to ship equipment, that's what it's going to cost you to get it through customs. So it's pretty expensive. Shipping, most telescope manufacturers will deliver to Chile. You just tell them, give them the address, and they'll ship it down there. Or you can ship it yourself. The 20-inch I kept in Oregon for about 2 years and worked on it and got it ready to go and then shipped it myself. And you do need to create it to international shipping standards. That turns out to not be very hard. If you call DHL, FedEx, or UPS for standard rates, you'll get the most. I mean, the first time I did it, I got a rate of $30,000. So, I about fell out of my chair. So what you really have to do is you have to use air cargo consolidators. NEX is one of them online. There are a bunch of them. NEX is the one I've used twice, and they're not totally trouble-free, but they've succeeded in getting my equipment down there, with zero damage both times. And we'll talk about the cost of that in a minute. DHL also has a last-minute standby consolidated air cargo rate. You'll need an account. And you'll need an account manager who can help you with that. And they have rates similar to, it's a consolidation rate. So you'll get a similar rate. The price is a product of the size and weight. Whether or not it's stackable adds a bit of expense. So if you tell them you can't put anything on top of this, that increases your price. So that speaks a little bit to the quality of your crating and all that stuff. My CDK-20 was about 1,000 pounds worth of gear. It was almost exactly 1,000 pounds in 4 crates. And that cost $5,600 through the air consolidator in 2020, plus $960 for insurance. So round numbers, about $6,600 with insurance to ship it down there. One of the things that you have to remember is that the Chilean government will charge you VAT on both your equipment and your cost for shipping it and insuring it. So they uplift that cost as well, which is a little bit aggravating. The required paperwork, and I get a lot of people calling me about this, so I put it up here. It's a little boring, but you need 3 things. You need a commercial invoice, you need, which has the declared value on it if it's used equipment. You need a packing list, and you need the airway bill, which comes from the shipper. And I think you need 4 copies of each one of these that has to go into a bag glued to the side of the crates. So that's what it takes to get it shipped into Chile. It's not that hard, but it's a little confusing to figure all this out on your own. So that's why I'm telling you guys this if you want to do it. The declared value, and I know a bunch of you heard me say declared value for used equipment. So why not just ship your $60,000 worth of used stuff down there and tell them it's worth 20 bucks? The problem is you're legally allowed up to 10% per year discount for gear up to a maximum of 30%. So the legal limit is 70% of the total value of what you ship down there if it's used. If you declare the value too low, they'll check, and you could be subject to fines that'll exceed the amount of money you thought you were saving. And the Chilean customs, they're used to looking at telescopes. They see this stuff come through a fair amount, and so they're pretty sharp. So I would recommend against the idea of trying to lowball your stated value for your equipment. I also advise avoiding against hand carrying expensive equipment undeclared through customs. That's also known as smuggling. And a lot of people have tried this, and some people have succeeded pretty well. I know of at least one person who came very close to being pulled into a little room over a lot of stuff he had in his bags. And I don't recommend this. I think everybody carries a few things down there and tools and a few things, but I don't recommend doing this. It adds to a lot of stress to going down there to install your telescope, trying to smuggle in expensive cameras and filters and filter wheels and guiders and all kinds of stuff. That's just not a good idea. Other costs you have to deal with are bank fees, custom agent fees, current conversion costs, transportation to the mountain, getting your scope there. And we'll talk about how far it is from where it arrives to the mountain in a minute. Setup fees, they'll set it up for you. And additional equipment, like you have to pay for a pier. You might want to buy an uninterruptible power supply, cabinets, etc. Here's what it looked like when I shipped my refractor down there. You know, I discovered these great crates from Uline that are like 30 by 30 inches, 30 by 30 by 30 inches, and they hold just about everything. And they arrive in the mail. They look like they're the weakest, crummiest thing you've ever seen until you put them together. They're rated for 10,000 pounds. And when you put them together, they're unbelievably strong. And they work really well. And in general, I would say plan on the shipping cost about 10% the value of your equipment. That's about what it's going to cost you to get it picked up on the truck and get it air freighted down there through a consolidator. Remember, all this stuff applies if you have to send replacement parts. So if something breaks, you got to go through this whole business of VAT and duty, packing it, paperwork, and all that stuff. It's not as bad as it sounds. These are the guys I like the best at International Parcel Services. They're great for small FedEx air shipments. So sending extra, a replacement camera or power supply. I just sent some aperture masks down there, some other things. It's typically about $75 for small things, and they get them there in like 3-4 days. It's actually pretty good. There are some costs at the other end that OpsTech will ding you for. Certain things can be ordered locally. I already talked about UPSs, but they're expensive. A $300 UPS in the US will cost like $850 in Chile. And again, it's just their cost structure it's crazy. They charge a lot. Cables, small cameras, and other parts can be ordered locally. And in fact, OpsTech has some in stock. So if something breaks that's common, they may have it. And they'll supply a locally made pier. This is a steel pier that gets welded up and painted. They're actually quite nice, and they're like $600 that you'll need for a larger telescope. So summary on costs. People ask me, what's it cost? Well, it's about 36% of the total price of all your gear to get new equipment down on site in Chile, which is pretty expensive when you think about it. If you've got $100,000 worth of gear you're going to send down there, I'm just picking that because it's a round number, And there's a lot of scopes down there that are worth that value. You know, those guys are paying about $36,000 to get it down there. So it's not cheap to get it there. So where is this place? Well, it's at minus 30 degrees latitude, south latitude. And it's north of Santiago. And I did the drive once. It's 9 to 10 hours to drive from the observatory down to Santiago. It's a full-on long day. So typically what you do to get down there is you fly into Santiago and you take a commuter airliner to La Serena, which is a beach resort town that's to the north of Santiago, and it's maybe an hour flight. And then you do the drive, and the drive here from Google Maps, it says 2 hours and 18 minutes. That's really not quite right. It's closer to 2.5 hours of driving to get out to the observatory. The observatory will arrange a cab for you. I think I've got another slide on that, but they'll arrange a cab for you to get out there, and it's about $400 round trip to get out there. Getting there seemed easy. The first time I got out there by a private flight, it was kind of a lucky thing, and I won't talk about that. But the first time I tried to get there commercially, I pulled up the United site, and the first one-way ticket flight showing on United to get to Santiago from my little airport in Redmond, Oregon, was $25,000. I pulled it up before when I did this presentation, and it was down to a round trip of $12,000, which is crazy. What you really want to do is you want to start with the Chilean airlines. You want to start with either eSky or LATAM and work your way backward to figure out how to do a round trip from the US. And that's the way to get it cheaper. You can get fares as low. I've actually seen them down in the $480 or so. $650 is not uncommon for round trip from the US. But those are never at the time you want to go. They're never to where you want to go. They're just sort of the clickbait kind of price. I think it's better to budget about $1,800 round trip. You'll have an easier time finding a flight. You've got to watch the travel times. From my little airport in Redmond, I mean, I could have spent 50 to 60 hours getting there. But if I was careful, I could get down there in 33 hours or less. So you have to watch that. But just for budgeting purposes, it's about $1,800 round trip. Depends on the time of year and a bunch of other things like that. But that should set you up. I also highly recommend, if you could afford it, doing business class, particularly coming back. If you've been there for a week and you've lost a bunch of sleep, coming back coach is just torture. And both of these airlines have a great thing we don't have in the US, which is to allow you to bid on upgraded travel. And that is just a fantastic way to go. And I won one of those bids coming back, and it was worth it. And getting to the observatory, we're going to do a little aerobatic roll. I'm going to show you guys a little movie here. There we go. This is from the pickup truck of one of the guys at the observatory who came down. Actually, this might have been, oh no, this was one of the guys in the observatory. This was not the taxi driver. But this is what the road looks like going up there. It's just a dirt road. It's pretty narrow. It's one way. You don't want to meet somebody coming in the other direction. So you get down there, you stay overnight in La Serena. The observatory, as I mentioned, arranges a cab to the observatory, and it's $400 round trip for basically 5 hours of cab ride. It's about 2.5 hours one way. When you get up there, when I first went there, I think Vincent picked me up, and we drove up there with Vincent or one of the guys at the observatory, and they stopped at a store for me so I could buy 2 refillable water bottles. And I've told everybody who asks me, you got to do this. You got to get 2 big bottles of water because there's only one place to get water on the mountain, and you need something to carry around with you, and you need to bring snacks up there. So that's if anybody who goes up there for some period of time, and a lot of us go there, if you go all this way down there, you're going to be there for a week. So those are the 2 secret things you need to know: 2 big bottles of water and bring a lot of snacks. In my case, departing early on a Monday, I got there at noon on a Wednesday. So, and that's going to depend on where you live, obviously. So it's a long trip getting down there. Let's go ahead. Oops, I goofed here. Let's see if we can get all the way up to the top here. Let me fast forward this. So this is the arrival at the top. You go around this fenced area where the Russian telescopes are, and you kind of pull into an area right at the top that's flat on the top of the mountain. And you come to the main building. They have some barbecues and some little telescopes there. So that's what it looks like. There's Atlas. I'll talk about Atlas in a minute. So this is kind of what it looks like when you get up to the top. And as you're approaching the observatory, this is what the mountain looks like. And you can see it's really an arid area. This looks, I would say this looks a lot like Arizona, but it's a lot drier. It's a little bit like being on the moon. There are some cactus that look a little bit like organ pipe cactuses and saguaros in this part of Chile. It's very rocky, not a lot of brush, and the views are spectacular. It's a very serene place. It's really out in the middle of nowhere. The neighborhood. This is a pretty famous area, and standing at the observatory, when you look off at the ridgetop, you can see the LSST telescope, the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, which is the Vera C. Rubin Observatory, and you can see Gemini South, which is an 8-meter telescope. The GMT, the Giant Magellan Telescope, is being built much further away. It's about 100 miles away, further north. But you can, you're sitting in a valley that is a big deal for astronomy. These are the best guys in the world, or at least among the best guys in the world. So on top of the mountain, this is a great picture I borrowed from the OpsTech site. They flew a drone and got some great overhead views. There's about 9 roll-off roof buildings, and there's a new one that's in progress that'll go online, I'm told, in December. There's Atlas, and again, I'll talk about that, run by the University of Hawaii. They're the Russian telescopes, which are these big domes. And my understanding is those might be being sold. I'm not quite sure. The Chile scope is there and some other scopes, and I'm not quite sure all of what's in all those domes. There's a 1 meter and a couple of half-meter scopes. And then there's multiple small buildings and domes. There's currently about 100 telescopes on site. And there's a solar farm, battery generator facility. There's a main office with a dorm, workshop, kitchen, bathroom, control center. There's a guest facility. They're trying to build up the ability to have owners come out and work on their own equipment. So I'll show you that in a minute. This we drove up to. This is the main office where the dorms, kitchen, and bath are. They have some barbecues. They have a shade structure. They have this old Dob sitting out there, and they can kind of have social time there in the evening as the sun goes down. And this guy walking up the road here, that might be Igor, I'm not sure. It leads down to the rest of the observatory buildings. Out in back of that administrative building, there's the Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System, which is ATLAS. This is basically a system, one of a system of 4 telescopes that are distributed around the planet that image the sky 2 times every night. It's an F2 half-meter telescope, and they're looking for objects, big objects that could cause another mass extinction event. These are the guys we're going to hear from if we're in deep trouble with something coming at Earth. They've already discovered over, close to 900 near-Earth asteroids, potentially hazardous asteroids, 87 of them. They've discovered 82 comets and nearly 15,000 supernova. Interestingly enough, this is run, the software was written and operated by a guy who used to work for me at one of my companies. I actually worked with him at 2 companies, and he went off to work for these guys in Hawaii and ended up getting his PhD in astrophysics, which I thought was fantastic. There are a lot of large roll-off roof observatories. These are really state-of-the-art. They've designed a really fantastic roll-off roof capability. This is building number 9, which is the small telescope facility. I think the largest scope they'll put in here is 14 inches. This is where my refractor is sitting, and I don't think I don't have a cursor. So let's see if I can set up a cursor. Hopefully you guys can see this. Let's see here. Let's see, we want a laser pointer. So this, hopefully you can see that. This right here is my small refractor, kind of in the middle of the building. They also have solar and lithium ion battery facility to provide power for the whole system. And let's see, they've got, there's a generator backup system. This is Vincent showing off the batteries and the solar farm. And it's very impressive. It's an amazing facility that they have set up. So the whole system runs off of batteries at night. So the power is very clean. The one problem with this whole scheme is if it's cloudy for too many days in a row, they run out of juice, and so they shut everything down. So that's the one time that you can find yourself unable to talk to your telescope. This is the main observatory control room. This is in the main building, and they monitor weather, they monitor the roofs, they monitor pretty much everything here. And it's impressive. They have this all set up to control pretty much everything remotely from this station. The kitchen is just around the corner from this. How about support? Well, there are currently, I didn't ask Vincent how many guys are working there right now, so this is kind of a guess, but it's like 5 to 7 techs working there total. There's normally 1, sometimes 2 that are, I'd say often 2 on the mountain. Holidays and some weekends, they may have none. So, you know, Christmas Day, if you need help with your telescope, there's not going to be anybody there. But most of the time, if you have trouble, you can get somebody to help you. They're very knowledgeable and they're very eager to do a good job. So these guys are great. They have a service ticket system that brings help pretty quickly. You can't just contact them and say, go over to my telescope. You've got to fill out a ticket. That helps them to keep track of where their time's going. And they're very responsive to the tickets each night. They look through them and they will jump right on them as fast as they can. And direct communications are through Telegram. So that's how you communicate with these guys. And none of them are native English speakers, but all of them are speak English well enough to be able to communicate with them to work through technical problems. These are the 2 scopes that I have up close, the GTX 130 and the 500 millimeter plane wave CDK in 2 different buildings. That's what they look like. How about dirt? For those of you who haven't imaged remotely, my guess is that if you're operating at your house, you cover up your optics every night. But at a remote observatory, you can't do that. And so when I went down there in April, one of my jobs was to clean the scope, the 20-inch. And I started cleaning it and realized, oh, I need to take a picture. So this is just a picture of how much dirt accumulated in about 18 months. And you have to remember it accumulates on the primary, the secondary, and the field optics. So I had to clean all of it, and I made it look like new by the time I was done. They do have a service where they clean your scope every 2 weeks now they're using dry ice frost to clean the scopes. That's very effective for taking off dirt. But again, they don't clean they only clean the primary. And this is Vincent kind of demonstrating the system for me there on the 20-inch. So you get some idea, and it's pretty good. I mean, it helps a lot that they clean it every 2 weeks. A lot of people have asked me about dew. This was after 3 months in the summertime, and I found rivulets of dew in the dust on the side of the scope. And in fact, this is what the animals live off of, and a lot of the little plants and stuff that live off of in this area is dew. And so there is dew. You do need a dew system there. It's not a huge problem, but it is something that you have to be aware of. And so I have a dew control system on this. There are some hazards there. You got to be careful walking around at night. In the daytime, this picture on the right doesn't really do this drop-off justice. They level the ground where the building's going to go, and they leave just a big drop-off. This is about a 10-foot drop-off, and it's pretty much vertical. It doesn't really look like it in this picture. But in the dark, it is so dark you can't see where you're going, and you have to walk down a little path that's right next to this to get into building number 9. And so you want to be really careful. You have a headlight and you know where you're going. OSHA isn't there. There's no safety rails or anything. Nobody has ever fallen off of it to my knowledge, but boy, you want to be careful. When I saw this, I thought, boy, don't fall off of that. And then there are, these cactus balls that fall off, and, trying to find your way back to your accommodations at night, you could crash into one of these things at night, and boy, you'd never do it twice. It's pretty amazing. These things are all over the place. So there are some hazards. You absolutely need a good headlamp there. This is what the customer accommodations look like. There's no bathroom. It was getting cold when I was there in April, so I was really happy that the heater worked well. But it's a nice little facility, and they're talking about, they've drywalled it out on the inside. They're talking about putting in, I think, 2 or 3 more of these. I hope they do. Because this makes it really convenient to stay there. And I think they charge $90 a night or so to stay in this thing. So, which is fair enough. You're out in the middle of nowhere, and this really works well, and it's comfortable. Eating there, they have a kitchen. This picture on the left was from a social night during my first visit back in 2022. The Russians were there. This was right when Ukraine got invaded. All these guys ended up getting trapped in Chile. I don't think any of them have gone home. And Igor, this guy who's goofing around with the knife and the cloth here in the third picture over, cooking breakfast, they ended up hiring him. And so he's one of the support guys now. In fact, he's in charge of all the support guys. But he made dinner and made breakfast for me. He's a super nice guy and really into astronomy and being there. They don't allow alcohol there anymore. I think there was some incident. The first night I was there in 2022, they had alcohol, but I've heard they've since banned alcohol up there, so they don't have that anymore. I never heard what the incident was, but I'm sure it was a good story. So what could possibly go wrong? You put everything out there. I think you guys, a lot of you have seen my posts on how careful I was putting my equipment down there. Well, things don't always go the way you expect. New equipment that doesn't work, you get failures. This is a picture of a variable power supply that was rated for 25 amps, and you can see it's indicating an 80 amp draw at 11.6 volts DC. This thing may have taken out one of my cameras, this took me down for quite a while because I didn't have a spare power supply at the time, and it turned out it wasn't really putting out 80 amps. It was just a complete failure of the insides of this power supply. You can experience support mistakes, wiring errors. They tend to replace wires and forget about umbilicals, and they'll stretch a new power wire right across an umbilical so that you can't rotate things. And so I had a little talk with them about that while I was out there. And tech support, these guys are really focused on doing a good job, but they don't know what you're looking for. So you have to figure out how to ask the right question to be able to diagnose a problem out there. So I had my system had PA errors for a year. The polar alignment was not very good. I had to redo it when I was out there. I think they've gotten better at it. I talked to them a lot about this and what happened. And that's a long story I won't go into, but I think they're better at it now. And some of the guys don't have a deep technical background in the mechanics and the technical aspects of the telescope equipment. So sometimes, you get incomplete testing and stuff. Again, they're very good guys. I don't say that as a criticism. They're very good guys, but you have to help them a lot of times. And then you can have loss of power or network connections. And usually that's because of cloudy days, but that can happen if something goes down. My big point is test your whole system before you ship it out there. Don't just send a pile of new parts. And that happens all the time. I mean, there are guys who buy all this new equipment and send it out there in a big pile and say, put it together for me. They'll do that, but you don't know what you're going to get. My other big thing is send critical spares: main camera, guide camera, power supplies, cables. Apply best practices. So one of the things I did is on AstroBin is I posted last night a best practices for remote systems up in the forums there. Just for you guys who are watching this talk, you can go download that. It's just a quick spew of all the things I could think of. It's about 8 pages worth of stuff. So if you're going to put a remote system down in Chile or even in the US, you might want to download that and just take a look at it. Configure your system to be serviceable. I'll talk about that in a minute. Set it up yourself or oversee the setup, go down there. And then writing up detailed instructions can help a lot. So those are the things you do to mitigate problems. And yes, I did say send an extra camera. I had 2 guide cameras and 1 imaging camera fail all within the first 12 months of operation. So I strongly recommend buying and shipping 2 of those expensive imaging cameras. And I know they're expensive. So if you just send 1 and it fails, it took me almost 6 months to get that problem resolved. It was a big mess. I had supply chain issues. I had shipping issues. I had a million problems trying to get that fixed. And so be very careful about that. The cost and rent during the downtime can grow to equal the cost of the camera if you don't send one. So don't assume cameras don't fail. If it's in your backyard, the chances of it failing are almost nothing. But if you send it 7,000 miles away, Murphy says it's going to fail. How good is the seeing down there? Well, this is some data that Vincent put together that I thought was really interesting. The best seeing is around 0.7, 0.8 arc seconds, typically. And interestingly enough, the design criteria for the LSST was 0.7 arc seconds. So that jives with the data that they're using on the next ridge over. The sort of the median is kind of 1.3, but you'll notice it can get as bad as 4. I mean, it gets way out there. SQM is around 22 magnitudes per square arc second. It's the darkest sky I've ever seen. It's shockingly dark. It's like being in space. The only light dome out there is from La Serena, and it's very tiny. The wind during the summer almost goes to 0 at every sunset. I don't remember it ever blowing very hard out there. And this is 2 years worth of seeing data from a differential seeing monitor that's pretty good out there. These were just some data, some random plots from the seeing monitor that I grabbed. And, you know, you can see here, hopefully you can see my pointer on the top plot. You could see that it went down to about 0.7 and kind of bounced around there before it finally came up above 1 arc second. A lot of nights, here's another night where it was below 1 arc second. Other nights, it might be between 1.5 and then go below 1 arc second. But it's not uncommon at the very bottom to see between 1 and, going on 2.5 arc seconds if it's not very good. But it really does get below 1 arc second occasionally out there. You do see it. How about the rent? The rent for large scopes is now at about $13,000 a year paid annually. This is a little bit aggravating to me. They take all of your expenses during the year and they throw it into your bill and they send you a bill and it's more than what you thought your rent was. And they don't itemize anything. It's really hard to sort of parse out what the heck am I paying for here? So you kind of have to trust they do it right. And I think they do, but I find it I like to know what I'm paying for. So that's slightly aggravating. The small scope building is somewhat less expensive. It used to be $6K and I don't know what it is now. So I want to be careful about setting expectations on that, but it's less expensive than the big scope buildings. So what happens when you're done? This is a big question. It costs a lot to get your gear down there. So it's normally a one-way trip. So when you're done, you either sell the scope in place. The typical pricing for equipment is the new equipment price down there. And by the way, this is a great deal for buyers. So if you hear about equipment selling down there, this is really a good deal. Remember that 36% of what it costs to get the stuff down there. This is actually a great way to get into remote imaging without all the pain of doing it yourself. And then finally, some guys donate stuff. And I've seen a lot of donated equipment down there, donating it to universities. OpsTech actually has a couple scopes that were donated. So in conclusion, we'll just wrap it up here. We're kind of coming toward the end. Imaging from Chile, it's not for the financially faint of heart. It costs well over a third of the value of your gear just to get it down there and installed. The number of clear nights really is staggering. I mean, that 300 nights a year, at least in my year and a half of being down there, more than a year and a half, is pretty much verifies that. The southern winter sees the most clouds and the worst seeing, and that's kind of what we have going on right now. The seeing is very good. It's not always superb, but spring and fall are the best. And finally, after my trip, I realized, this is a big trip to go down there. It's a lot of travel and a lot of work to get down there, but it's really an amazing trip, and I look forward to going down there again. So, in conclusion, I have to say I'm always impressed with you guys who want to kind of dig through the arcane details of this stuff. So congratulations, you've made it through. And at this point, I can turn off this my presentation and take any questions if you guys have them.
There's a couple of questions, John. One, I think you answered a number of times, is what do you do when things go wrong and you have problems? And it sounds like their ticketing system with the techs is pretty efficient.
That's right. Yeah, their ticketing system is really good. When I first started, they didn't have the ticketing system. And so I got used to just getting on Telegram and saying, hey, would somebody walk over to my scope and check the wire going to the guide camera? And now that they have the ticketing system, that doesn't work anymore. In fact, they won't even pay attention to you. If you haven't submitted a ticket that says go over to the scope and please check the wiring, they won't even get the message. They are very focused on the ticketing system, and frankly, it does work very well. So I've come to like the ticketing system, And from their standpoint and for running a business, it keeps track of where their time's going. Because I think they were really out of control before they had that. They never knew who was spending time on what. So I think the ticketing system was a very good thing.
That makes sense. Another question, do you insure your system when it's down there?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And I struggled with that first in New Mexico, because New Mexico, when I was at DSW, sits in a big, pretty much wooden building out in an area where a fire could run through there in a heartbeat and burn everything up. And I really struggled with that. And I made it through my 5 years or so at DSW without ever buying insurance. And down in Chile, I have not bought insurance. And I suspect the problem would be to go to your insurance agent and say, hey, I've got all this gear down in Chile. I insured it, by the way, I insured it when it was here in Oregon, when I kept it in an airplane hangar. But down in Chile, it's very hard to get an insurance agent to even understand what he's insuring, how much it would cost, what the risks are. He might look at the surrounding area with the goat farmers and stuff and think, gee, they could have theft and all this stuff. The Russians put in all these big fences. I don't think they have any trouble with crime or anybody going up there who's not authorized. I don't think, looking at how little vegetation that is there, there's almost zero risk of fire. The weather is very benign other than being hot. So I've decided to just self-insure it. So if it, for some reason, I lose it for whatever reason, there's some possibility of earthquakes there, I suppose. But that's not a big concern on my part. So, the odds of really losing the telescope are really, really low down there. So it's a very good question, but I don't insure my equipment down there.
So did you have it set up as an all-pass system, the 20-inch and a derotator, or you have an offset pier?
No, I've always set it up as an equatorial system. So I have a wedge and it runs as an equatorial system.
So do you have an offset pier, or is it the weight just hanging off?
Oh, it just hangs. Yeah, no, it's not an offset pier. You don't really need an offset pier to run it equatorially. You just need a really strong pier and a really good steel weldment to attach everything. But it's really solid. I mean, it doesn't ring. I don't have any troubles with vibration or even when I'm down there. I mean, the thing is hell for stout.
Anybody else have any questions? Let's see. I've heard
I was
most
curious.
remote imagers collect and amass data, then they get overwhelmed and don't get around to processing the data. Is there any truth to this? Does your data pile up here and you forget about it?
No, never.
Well, for me, I know sometimes it does for me. Part of the problem is sometimes I image an object I'm not really super interested in. I'm kind of wondering what's in the sky right now, and I might point it and think, oh, I'll image this thing, kind of while I'm thinking about what I really want to image, and I'll pile up all this data on something I'm not super excited about, or the data that I gather, and this is more common, is just terrible. For whatever reason, the seeing's terrible, and I've got just gobs of 3 and 4 second arc second data, and if I shifted through it, I could probably pull something out of it. But I will admit I've got a few things sitting on my disk that are waiting for a future board moment to go process. So that can happen. It depends on how energetic you are in terms of processing. Some folks want to process an image every single day, and this is the way to do that. If you want to process an image every morning, this is the way to do it.
Well, I mean, I image at the SRO and I do exactly that, but I certainly occasionally get to the end. I won't leave the data sit there all by itself. I'll process it, look at it at the end and go, no.
Yeah, right.
No, that's not going anywhere.
I've had a few images where I start processing and say, this isn't going anywhere. Had a few of those, but I do have, a few tranches of raw data sitting there on my NAS system that I just haven't touched. And I keep thinking I'm going to get to these. I tend to only release, maybe a dozen, maybe 15 images every year. I have too many other things going on in my life. This isn't the only thing that I do in my life, and trying to do it every day, there's no way I have time for that. So I really have, and when I process an image, I go head over heels and I can't do anything else. I become completely obsessed. So I'll do that for 3-4 days and then move on and let it mellow for a week or two before I do another one.
John, we're all obsessed. You're not alone.
Right. That's right.
Sorry. It's part of the hobby. Anybody else have any questions? Patrick, do you?
Yeah, I was wondering, with those bigger scopes, what do folks tend to do about flats down there? Do they have a bunch of wall-mounted flat panels or sky
Yeah.
flats or?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Patrick. And in fact, I didn't mention this, but my 20-inch is one of the small systems out there. There are just gobs of 24s and 28s, and there's probably 3 or 4 1-meter scopes. There are a lot of big scopes down there. So that was the question I asked, and just kind of poking around, I found out most of these guys do sky flats. And I personally don't like doing sky flats. I've done them, but I don't like doing them. And it's a long process to do them. So you've got to be kind of Johnny on the spot when the roof opens to grab things at sunset, and be there at sunrise to grab things at sunrise, at least with the way that I do things. And so I have a flat panel on the 20-inch. And when I do the 24, I'm just going to build a big flat panel. I really like flat panels. And probably half the guys out there will say, God, this guy's a nut. He's got a giant flat panel. But I like the way flat panels work. So I'm going to do a flat panel. And I've got another guy with a 24-inch. He just installed one down there who wants me to make him one too. So there may be a few down there that are big flat panels. So, we'll see. I've talked to Adam Block about this a little bit. He's getting ready. He's working on putting a 24 down there as well. And he and I've talked flat panels, and he's totally okay with sky flats, and a lot of people are. So, it's mostly sky flats down there for the big scopes. Certainly the 1 meters are all sky flats.
Sure. With your flat panel, when you put that up, did you take that into consideration, or did they, when you picked the pier location that they assigned to you?
No. So I actually have 2 panels. So I have a light panel, a flat panel, and a dark panel. So the light panel, what they did is they did something kind of silly. They just bolted them vertically so the telescope horizontal would point at either one of these panels. And by the way, the dark panel is because my camera doesn't have a shutter. And I want something dark that I can point at to take darks. And I don't want to pick up a random light in the observatory. And so I have this black panel I can point at. But they set it up in such a way that I have to go to a really high angle in order to get past them to see the sky. And the poor guy next to me has to do the same thing. And he was very nice about it. He said, I don't care. But if it was me, I would have been not very happy with the guy next to me who did that. So when I was down there in April, I had them re-weld the whole thing. And I had them lower it, and I had them put it at an angle so that I can point down at these things. And so I don't have to point very high to get over them. I think I can get over them, at 10 degrees or 15 degrees now. So they didn't do a good job of putting them in, but if you mount them properly, you can set them up in such a way that you point the scope down to get to the flat panel. So
another question came up while we're chatting here. Have you ever thought about selling your data?
Well, so that's actually a good question too. So most of the time when you sign a contract at a remote observatory, you are not allowed to sell the data. They have restrictions on selling data. And if you want to sell data, you've got to go to them and say, okay, I want to sell data, and how can we rewrite this contract? But what they're worried about is, 2 guys putting in scopes and then selling so much data that nobody else wants to put a scope down there. That's what they're worried about. That's functionally what they're worried about. Whether that would happen or not, I don't know. But, that's what the Chile scope does. That's a whole business that's based on selling data. So no, I don't sell data. And again, it's a contractual requirement that I can't sell data. Now, that's not to say you can't share some images here and there. If I'm comparing some results on something with Matt or with Kevin Moorfield or something. I mean, we exchange data all the time and just kind of compare our results just to see how we're doing. But that's not the same as selling data. That's not what they're worried about. So the answer is no.
If you start selling data, you can really suck all the fun out of what we do.
Oh, absolutely.
And it becomes then it's like some kind of a business which you can never make a buck out of.
No, absolutely. If I was worried about money, I wouldn't be doing this at all. And I think in order to be, none of this makes any financial sense. I mean, I should have my head examined. But, putting a 24-inch down there, I mean, I don't even want to talk about how much that's going to cost. But, life is short and I want to do it. selling data would just ruin the experience for me, frankly.
Yeah, we can
You're
all
right.
we can all raise our hand on that. It's
Yeah,
like,
I think we're all in agreement with that. And this is only one of my two hobbies. My aviation hobby makes this look super cheap. So, none of you guys don't ever get close to airplanes or helicopters, because that'll make your telescope hobby seem like the cheapest thing you ever did in your life.
By the way, even after we close the meeting, you hang with us a little bit. We usually have a interesting discussion afterwards. Any more questions? I don't see anything popping up at YouTube.
And
Well,
I just wanted.
We'll have to talk about something more technical than this. This is kind of more of an informational nuts and bolts kind of how do you do this kind of thing. But my real love is doing kind of talking about the technical aspects of imaging. So we'll have
Next time you're welcome back anytime.
Yeah, it's always
Absolutely.
fun. Yeah,
6
always
months, come on back and pick yourself a subject.
absolutely.
And if I can just jump in with something real quick, right now, TAIC has our workshop, and the data that's out there in that workshop is from Kevin Moorfield. Kevin has a scope sitting down there pretty close to John's. He's got a 17-inch plane wave sitting down there, I believe. And the data that he shared with us is, data from down there in OpsTech, Chile. So if you want to process some of that data, it's free for you. Go ahead, download it, and you'll get yourself on the program. So,
and let me just say, I've seen
mention
Kevin's data, and he's gathering superb data with that 17-inch.
Okay.
really terrific. I processed it. It's beautiful.
I process that is some of the finest data that I've seen. I don't.
Oh yeah,
That
he's
must have
getting
been
really
a
good.
0.7 night. We got some of that.
Yep.
Kevin's going to be on the program when we do the workshop here coming up in a couple of weeks. So we'll get to hear
truth
from
be
Kevin as
told,
well.
Kevin has driven me crazy with how good his data is.
That's the difference between the 17 and the 20, though. It's not
Yeah,
really that it's better. It just looks different.
I think the 17 somehow is a little tighter than the 20. I'm not sure why, but I think it is.
Well, it is. I can tell you, because I've done some comparisons with
Yeah,
Kevin.
So Tim, no more harassing me about my star spikes, please.
No, I'm just going to buy a 17 and embarrass you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good scope.
Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the program. It's always great to see you, and really enjoyed the presentation tonight. And if there's no more questions, I think we're good to say good night.
Well, thank you again for the invitation. It was my pleasure.
All righty. Good night, everyone. Terry, can
Terry?
you take us out?
You're in charge. See y'all next week.